The morning sun cast long shadows across the stone steps of St. Andrew's University as Catherine Middleton hurried toward her art history lecture. Her long brown hair caught the Scottish breeze, and she clutched her books tightly against her chest. She was already 10 minutes late. Professor Henderson had a reputation for locking out tardy students as she pushed through the heavy wooden doors of the lecture hall. Every head turned toward her. The room fell silent, except for the soft click of her heels on the polished floor. Catherine felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment as she searched for an empty seat. Most of the rows were packed with students, their notebooks already open and pens poised. "Miss Middleton, how kind of you to join us," Professor Henderson said dryly, not looking up from his notes. "Perhaps you can tell us about the significance of Renaissance portraiture in conveying social status." Catherine's mind went blank. She had read the assignment, but standing there with dozens of eyes watching her, the words seemed to evaporate. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, feeling smaller by the second. The use of clothing and positioning. A calm voice said from somewhere in the middle of the room, often indicated the subject's wealth and connections to power. The artists would include specific symbols that only the educated elite would recognize. Catherine turned gratefully toward the voice and found herself looking at a young man with sandy blonde hair and kind blue eyes. He wore a simple sweater and jeans, nothing that would mark him as different from any other student. Yet there was something about the way he carried himself that suggested quiet confidence. "Thank you, Mr. Wales," Professor Henderson nodded approvingly. "Now, if everyone could turn to page 40-7... Catherine slipped into a seat near the back, still feeling shaken by her public stumble. She tried to focus on the lecture, but her attention kept drifting to the student who had rescued her from further embarrassment. "William Wales," she noted, writing his name in the margin of her notebook. After class, as students filed out chattering about weekend plans and upcoming assignments, Catherine gathered her things slowly. She wanted to thank the young man who had helped her, but he had already disappeared into the crowd of students heading toward the main corridor. "Rough morning?" a cheerful voice asked beside her. Catherine looked up to see a petite girl with short, blonde hair and a friendly smile. "I'm Sarah," the girl continued. "I saw what happened. Don't worry about Henderson. He's like that with everyone at first. We'll get used to his teaching style." "Catherine," she replied, grateful for the kindness. "And thank you. I thought I was prepared, but standing up there, it happens to the best of us," Sarah assured her. "Come on, I'll show you the best coffee shop on campus. You look like you could use some caffeine." As they walked across the cobblestone courtyard, Sarah chatted easily about university life, pointing out various buildings and sharing stories about different professors. Catherine found herself relaxing for the first time that morning. The coffee shop was tucked into the ground floor of an old stone building. Its windows steamed with warmth and filled with the rich aroma of freshly ground beans. Students sat at wooden tables, some studying intently, while others engaged in animated conversations about everything from philosophy to weekend parties. "Two lattes, please," Sarah ordered at the counter before Catherine could protest. "My treat," considered a welcome-to-university gift. They found a small table near the window, and Catherine finally felt some of the morning's tension leave her shoulders. "I have to ask," she said, stirring her coffee. "Do you know anything about that student who answered the question for me? William Wales?" Sarah's eyebrows shot up. "You don't know who that is?" "Should I?" Catherine asked, suddenly worried she had missed something obvious. Sarah leaned forward conspiratorially. "That's Prince William. You know, second in line to the throne, the royal family." Catherine's coffee cup froze halfway to her lips. "Joking? Not even a little bit?" Sarah grinned, though he tries to keep it low-key here. Most of us just treat him like any other student. That's what he wants. Catherine felt her stomach drop. A prince had saved her from embarrassment in front of the entire class. She thought about how normal he had seemed, how his intervention had been gentle rather than so well. Most people would have made a big production of helping someone in front of a lecture hall, but he had simply provided the answer and moved on. "I should thank him," Catherine said quietly. "You'll get your chance," Sarah replied. "He's in loads of classes. Art history, geography, anthropology. Plus, St. Andrews isn't that big. You'll run into each other again." The rest of the week passed in a blur of new classes, reading assignments, and trying to navigate the ancient university's maze-like buildings. Catherine threw herself into her studies, determined not to repeat her first-day disaster. She read ahead in all her textbooks and arrived early to every lecture. Friday afternoon found her in the library, surrounded by books about medieval art and scribbling notes for an upcoming essay. The afternoon light filtered through tall windows, creating patterns on the wooden tables where students hunched over their work. "Mind if I sit here?" Catherine looked up to find William Wales standing beside her table, holding a stack of books, and wearing that same quiet smile she remembered from their first encounter. Of course she managed. Hastily moving her papers to make room, he settled into the chair across from her, and for a moment they both pretended to focus on their respective work. Catherine found it impossible to concentrate with him sitting so close. She kept stealing glances at him, noting how he chewed the end of his pen when thinking and how he ran his fingers through his hair when a concept proved challenging. "I never properly thanked you," she said finally, breaking the comfortable silence between them. "For what?" he asked, looking genuinely puzzled. "For rescuing me in Henderson's class?" I was completely mortified. William's smile was warm and genuine. "Everyone has those moments. Certainly did during my first week. Actually, I think I called Professor McLeod Mom during a geography lecture. Thought I might have to transfer universities to escape the embarrassment." Catherine laughed despite herself. "You didn't." "I absolutely did. In front of 60 students, no less." They fell into easy conversation after that, discussing their classes, their adjustment to university life, and their shared struggles with Professor Henderson's demanding expectations. Catherine found herself forgetting entirely about William's royal status. He was simply a fellow student, funny and kind, with an unexpectedly self-deprecating sense of humor. The weeks that followed their library encounter established a comfortable rhythm between Catherine and William. They began sitting together in their shared classes, exchanging knowing glances when Professor Henderson launched into one of his famously lengthy tangents about brushwork techniques. Their friendship developed naturally, built on shared academic struggles and a mutual appreciation for dry British humor. Catherine discovered that William possessed an unexpected talent for making her laugh, often at the most inappropriate moments. During a particularly serious lecture about the symbolism in religious paintings, it sketched a cartoon version of their professor as a medieval saint, complete with a halo made of paintbrushes. Catherine had to press her lips together to keep from giggling audibly, earning a stern look from the front row. Their study sessions in the library became a regular occurrence. William would arrive with coffee for both of them, having somehow memorized that Catherine preferred her latte with an extra shot and a dash of cinnamon. They would spread their books across the worn wooden table, occasionally helping each other with particularly challenging concepts or sharing interesting discoveries from their research. "Did you know," Catherine said one afternoon, looking up from a thick tome about Byzantine art, that medieval artists sometimes painted themselves into religious scenes? Like, actually put their own faces on saints and angels? William glanced over from his geography textbook, where he had been studying population distribution patterns. "Sounds like the ultimate ego trip. Imagine explaining that to St. Peter at the gates." "I don't think it was about ego," Catherine replied thoughtfully. "I think they were trying to feel closer to something divine, to be part of something bigger than themselves." William set down his pen and looked at her with genuine interest. "You really love this stuff, don't you? Art history, I mean." "I do," Catherine admitted, feeling slightly self-conscious. "My friends back home think it's impractical. They're all studying business or law, something that guarantees a proper career. But when I look at these paintings, especially the portraits, I feel like I'm seeing into someone's soul. The artist captured not just how they looked, but who they were. That's not impractical at all," William said quietly. "That's beautiful." Something in his tone made Catherine look up sharply. Their eyes met across the table, and for a moment the library seemed to fade away around them. She felt her cheeks warm under his steady gaze, and she quickly looked back down at her book. "What about you?" she asked, eager to shift the focus away from herself. "Geography isn't exactly the most obvious choice for... She paused, still not entirely comfortable referencing his royal status. "For someone like me," William finished with a wry smile. My father thinks I should study something more traditional. History, perhaps, or classics. Something that would prepare me for the role I'll inherit someday. But geography is what you're passionate about. It is, he admitted. I love understanding how places shape people, how environment influences culture. When I look at maps, I see stories, migration patterns, trade routes, the rise and fall of civilizations. It's all connected. Catherine nodded, understanding completely. Your father isn't supportive? William's expression grew complicated. He means well. They all do. But sometimes I think they forget that I'm 20 years old and still figuring out who I am beyond the titles and expectations. The vulnerability in his voice caught Catherine off guard. She had seen glimpses of the person behind the prince, but this felt like something deeper, more honest. Well, she said carefully, for what it's worth, I think following your passion is never a mistake. Even if the path isn't traditional. William smiled at her, and Catherine felt something shift between them. Some invisible boundary quietly dissolving. Their friendship deepened as autumn progressed. They began spending time together outside of academic obligations, taking long walks along the Scottish coast when the weather permitted, or exploring the medieval streets of St. Andrews. William showed Catherine hidden corners of the town that most students never discovered. Places where the ancient stones held centuries of stories. During one particularly memorable afternoon, they had climbed to the ruins of St. Andrew's Cathedral, where the wind whipped off the North Sea and seagulls cried overhead. Catherine stood at the edge of what had once been the nave, trying to imagine the magnificent structure in its prime. It must have been incredible, she said, raising her voice slightly over the wind. All that color and grandeur, the windows casting rainbows across the floor during services. William stood beside her, hands in his pockets, looking out over the gray water. My grandmother told me once that ruins are more beautiful than complete buildings because they force you to use your imagination. They make you part of the story. Your grandmother sounds wise. She is, William replied, then added more quietly. She's one of the few people who sees me as William first, Prince second. Catherine understood the implication. She had begun to notice the subtle ways their friendship existed in a careful bubble, protected from the reality of William's position. When they were together, studying or talking or simply walking, it was easy to forget about crowns and protocols and the weight of centuries-old institutions, but the outside world had a way of intruding. Catherine began to notice things she had missed before, the discreet figures who seemed to shadow William at a distance. The way certain conversations stopped when he approached, the careful deference of some professors who clearly knew exactly who sat in their classrooms. The first time Catherine truly grasped the magnitude of William's position was during a university social event. She had been talking with a group of students near the refreshment table when someone mentioned seeing William arrive. Did you see the security detail? One girl whispered excitedly. There must be at least 4 of them trying to blend in with the students. Catherine's eyes automatically sought William across the crowded room. She found him engaged in what appeared to be a perfectly normal conversation with several classmates, but now she could see what she had been blind to before. The subtle positioning of certain individuals around the room. The way exits remained mysteriously unblocked. The nearly invisible earpieces worn by people who seemed just a bit too alert for a casual university gathering when William caught her eye and smiled, raising his plastic cup in a small salute. Catherine felt a strange mix of emotions. Affection, certainly, but also a growing awareness of the complexity that surrounded him. It surrounded them both by extension. Later that evening, as they walked back toward the student residences under a canopy of stars, Catherine found herself unusually quiet. "Penny for your thoughts?" William asked, noticing her subdued mood. "Just thinking," she replied, "about how different your life must be from everyone else's." William was quiet for a long moment. "Does it bother you? The security, the attention, all of it?" Catherine considered. "The question seriously? I don't know yet," she answered honestly. "I'm still getting used to thinking about it at all." "I understand if it's too much," William said quietly. "I wouldn't blame you if you decided our friendship was more complicated than you bargained for." Catherine stopped walking and turned to face him. In the lamplight, his expression was serious, almost vulnerable. "William," she said firmly, "you're my friend. Not because of who your family is, but because of who you are. The rest of it, we'll figure it out as we go." Relief washed over his features, and Catherine realized how much her answer had meant to him. In that moment, she understood something important about the young man walking beside her. For all his privilege and position, he carried a loneliness that few people could truly comprehend. Spring arrived in St. Andrews with an explosion of color that transformed the gray stone buildings in ancient streets. Cherry blossoms bloomed along the medieval walls, and students emerged from months of winter hibernation to sprawl on newly green lawns between classes. For Catherine and William, the changing season marked nearly a full year of friendship, and something deeper had begun to take root alongside the daffodils pushing through the Scottish soil. Their relationship had evolved so gradually that neither could pinpoint exactly when friendship had blurred into something more meaningful. It happened in small moments. The way William's hand would linger when passing her a book. The extra beat of silence before Catherine answered when he called her name. The increasing frequency with which they found excuses to spend time together. Beyond their shared academic pursuits, the shift became impossible to ignore during the university's annual charity fashion show, an event Catherine had initially planned to skip. She preferred quiet evenings with her textbooks to the social whirlwind of university events. But Sarah had convinced her to volunteer as a backstage helper. "Come on, Sarah," had pleaded over breakfast in the dining hall. "It's for charity, and besides, you need to do something that doesn't involve studying medieval paintbrush techniques." Catherine had reluctantly agreed, never imagining that William would be participating as one of the models, and she saw him backstage before the show, looking uncomfortable in an expensive suit while a makeup artist fussed over his appearance. Her heart did something unexpected in her chest. "You look terrified," she observed, approaching with a smile. "I am terrified," William admitted, tugging at his tie. "How did I let them talk me into this? I'm going to trip and fall in front of the entire university." "You'll be fine," Catherine assured him, reaching out to straighten his collar without thinking. The simple gesture felt surprisingly intimate, and when she looked up to find William watching her intently, something electric passed between them. "Places, everyone," the student director called out, breaking the spell. Catherine watched from the wings as William walked the makeshift runway with surprising confidence. The audience cheered enthusiastically, and she felt an unexpected surge of pride watching him handle the attention with grace and humor. When he caught her eye and winked as he reached the end of the catwalk, Catherine felt her cheeks flush with warmth that had nothing to do with the hot stage lights. After the show, as volunteers cleaned up scattered programs and folded chairs, William found Catherine arranging flowers that had been part of the stage decorations. "So," he said, settling beside her on the floor, "verdict. Did I manage not to embarrass myself completely?" "You were actually quite good," Catherine replied, continuing to work with the flowers. "Very professional." "I think you missed your calling as a model, right?" William laughed. "I'll be sure to mention that career option at the next family dinner." They worked in comfortable silence for a while, the backstage area gradually emptying. As other volunteers finished their tasks and headed off to celebrate at local pubs, eventually, they were alone among the discarded costumes and empty water bottles. "Catherine," William said quietly, his voice taking on a serious tone that made her look up from the flowers. "Yes." He seemed to struggle with whatever he wanted to say, opening his mouth and closing it again before finally shaking his head. "Never mind. It's not important." But Catherine could see in his expression that it was important, whatever he had been about to share. She set down the flowers and turned to face him fully. "William, what is it?" For a moment she thought he might deflect again, but then his blue eyes met hers with an intensity that took her breath away. "I've been thinking," he said carefully, "about us, about our friendship." Catherine's heart began to race, though she tried to keep her expression neutral. "What about it?" William continued, his voice barely above a whisper, "that it might be something more than friendship. At least for me it is." The confession hung in the air between them, charged with possibility and uncertainty. Catherine felt a dozen different emotions crash through her at once: joy, fear, excitement, and a deep, overwhelming affection for the young man sitting beside her among the scattered remnants of the evening's festivities. "For me too," she whispered, back and watched as relief and happiness transformed William's features. He reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers in a gesture that felt both natural and monumentally significant. They sat like that for a long time, not needing words to communicate the shift that had just occurred between them. The transition from friendship to romance happened slowly, carefully, as if they both understood the precious nature of what they were building together. William was surprisingly traditional in his courtship, bringing Catherine small gifts that showed he had been paying attention to her interests: a rare book about Renaissance art from a local antiquarian shop, a bouquet of wildflowers picked during one of their coastal walks, a CD of classical music by a composer she had mentioned loving. Their first official date was a quiet dinner at a small restaurant tucked away from the main tourist areas of St. Andrews. William had chosen the location carefully, somewhere they could talk without interruption or curious stares from other diners. Catherine wore a simple blue dress that brought out her eyes, and William had traded his usual casual attire for a button-down shirt that made him look older, more serious. "I have to admit," William said over their starter, "I've never done this before. Taken someone to dinner?" Catherine teased gently. "Dated someone who knew me before they knew about the royal bit," he clarified. "It's different, better, but also more nerve-wracking." Catherine understood what he meant. The weight of his position felt more present now that their relationship had shifted, like a shadow that followed them even during their most private moments. She had begun to notice photographers lurking around campus more frequently, though they kept a respectful distance. Students whispered more when she and William walked together. She sometimes caught people staring with undisguised curiosity. "Are you having second thoughts?" William asked, misreading her thoughtful expression. "No," Catherine said firmly. "Are you?" "Never," he replied without hesitation, reaching across the table to take her hand. "Though I should warn you, it's probably going to get more complicated before it gets easier." Catherine squeezed his fingers, drawing strength from the contact. "We'll figure it out together." As spring melted into summer, their relationship deepened, despite the growing external pressures. They carved out private moments whenever possible: late-night conversations in the library after other students had gone home, early morning walks along the beach when the town was still quiet, stolen kisses in the shadow of ancient stone walls. William introduced Catherine to his closest friends, a small group of trusted individuals who had known him long before university and treated him with the casual familiarity he craved. Catherine was surprised by how icily she fit into their dynamic, how naturally they accepted her presence in William's life. The real test came when William invited Catherine to spend a weekend at a country estate belonging to family friends. It would be their first time away together, their first real glimpse into the world William inhabited beyond the protective bubble of university life. Catherine spent hours agonizing over what to pack, uncertain about the protocols and expectations of aristocratic house parties. William, sensing her anxiety, had tried to reassure her that it would be relaxed and informal, but Catherine couldn't shake the feeling that she was stepping across an invisible threshold into territory she didn't fully understand. The weekend proved to be both wonderful and overwhelming. The estate was magnificent. All rolling grounds and elegant rooms filled with priceless art and furniture that belonged in museums. The other guests were uniformly charming and welcoming, but Catherine couldn't ignore the subtle reminders of the different world William came from, the way servants appeared silently to anticipate every need, the casual references to mutual friends with titles and vast estates, the assumption of privilege that permeated every conversation. William was attentive and loving throughout the weekend, clearly trying to ensure Catherine felt comfortable and included. But she could also see him slipping into a slightly different version of himself, one that moved more confidently through this rarefied atmosphere, one that belonged here in ways she wasn't sure she ever could. On Sunday evening, as they drove back toward St. Andrews, Catherine was unusually quiet. "The weekend was too much, wasn't it?" William said eventually, his voice heavy with disappointment. "Not too much," Catherine replied carefully. "Just ... a lot to process." She turned to look at his profile in the fading light, this young man she had fallen in love with, and felt the weight of all the complications that surrounded him, that surrounded them both now. The future stretched ahead of them, full of possibility and uncertainty in equal measure. The years following university passed in a whirlwind of transition and growth for both Catherine and William. After graduation, they faced the challenge of maintaining their relationship while navigating vastly different professional paths. William entered military training at Sandhurst, preparing for his future role while serving his country, while Catherine found herself thrust into a strange new existence as the girlfriend of a prince, a role for which no handbook existed. Media attention that had remained relatively contained during their university years exploded into something far more intense and invasive. Photographers camped outside Catherine's London flat, telephoto lenses trained on her every movement. Tabloid headlines speculated endlessly about their relationship status, analyzing every public appearance and drawing conclusions from the smallest gestures or perceived slights. Catherine struggled to adapt to this new reality. Simple activities, like shopping for groceries or meeting friends for coffee, became complicated operations requiring strategy and timing. She learned to scan crowds for suspicious figures with cameras, to vary her routine to avoid predictable patterns, to dress carefully because every outfit would be photographed and critiqued in the press. "I never imagined it would be this intense," she confided to William during one of his brief leaves from military service. They were sitting in her small flat, curtains drawn against the persistent photographers stationed across the street. William's jaw tightened with frustration. "I've spoken to my father's staff about increasing security for you, but they say there are protocols, procedures that have to be followed. You're not officially part of the family, so the protection is limited." The phrase hung heavy between them, not officially part of the family. It encapsulated the strange liminal space Catherine occupied, too connected to ignore, too unofficial to protect properly. She was scrutinized like a royal, but without any of the institutional support that came with the position. Despite these challenges, their relationship continued to deepen. William's military service meant long separations, but they made the most of their time together. They traveled when possible, finding refuge in remote locations where they could simply be a young couple in love, without the weight of expectation and scrutiny that followed them in London during a particularly memorable trip to Kenya. Staying at a remote conservation lodge, Catherine saw William in his element. He was passionate about wildlife protection and environmental conservation, speaking knowledgeably with local researchers about elephant migration patterns and anti-poaching efforts. Watching him under the vast African sky, surrounded by the wildlife he was determined to protect, Catherine understood something fundamental about the man she loved. His sense of duty wasn't just about royal obligation, but about genuine care. "For the world and its future, you're different here," she observed one evening as they sat around a campfire, the sounds of the African night surrounding them. "How so?" William asked, though his smile suggested he knew what she meant. "More yourself. Somehow, like you're not carrying the weight of everyone's expectations." William reached for her hand, calloused from his military training. "That's because I'm with you. You see me for who I am, not who I'm supposed to be." Those words stayed with Catherine long after they returned to London, through the renewed media frenzy that greeted their arrival and the endless speculation about their future. The press had begun to use phrases like "weighty Katie," suggesting she was simply biding her time until William proposed. The nickname stung, reducing her to nothing more than a woman waiting for a man's decision about her worth. The pressure began to affect their relationship in subtle but significant ways. William became increasingly protective, sometimes overcompensating, in ways that felt suffocating. Catherine, meanwhile, struggled with the loss of her independent identity, feeling like she was disappearing into the shadow of her famous boyfriend. The breaking point came during what should have been a celebration. William's completion of his helicopter pilot training. Catherine attended the ceremony, proud of his accomplishment. But the event was overshadowed by intense media coverage and speculation about why she wasn't sitting with family members, what her presence or positioning might signify for their relationship's future. That evening, back at William's quarters, The strain finally showed. "I can't do this anymore," Catherine said quietly, the words escaping before she could stop them. William looked up from the papers he had been reviewing, his expression immediately concerned. "Can't do what?" "This," Catherine gestured helplessly. Around them, speculation, the photographers, the constant analysis of every single thing I do or don't do. I feel like I'm losing myself. William set aside his papers and moved to sit beside her on the small sofa. "I know it's difficult, but it will get easier once we're married. Once you have official status, there will be more protection, more support." "Once we're married?" Catherine repeated, her voice sharp with hurt. "Is that what this is about? Just waiting for the right moment to make it official?" "That's not what I meant," William said quickly, but Catherine could see the truth in his eyes. He had been thinking about marriage, planning for it even, but in terms of duty and timing, rather than love and commitment. "I need some space," Catherine said, standing up abruptly. "Need to remember who I am outside of all this." William's face paled. "Catherine, please, don't do anything rash. We can work through this." But Catherine was already gathering her things, her movements quick and determined. "I'm not doing anything rash. I'm trying to save myself before I disappear completely." The separation that followed was painful for both of them, but particularly difficult for Catherine, who found herself suddenly without the relationship that had defined her adult life. The media, naturally, had a field day, speculating endlessly about the reasons for their split and whether it was permanent. Catherine retreated to her family home in Berkshire, grateful for the normalcy of her childhood surroundings and the unconditional support of her parents and siblings. Slowly, she began to rediscover parts of herself that had been buried under years of public scrutiny and relationship pressure. She threw herself into work at her family's party planning business, finding satisfaction in concrete tasks and measurable achievements. She reconnected with old friends who had known her before she became William's girlfriend, rediscovering interests and passions that had nothing to do with royal protocols or public perception. Most importantly, she began to understand that she couldn't build a life solely around someone else's expectations and timeline, no matter how much she loved them. If she was going to be with William, it had to be as a complete person in her own right, not as an appendage to his royal role. William, meanwhile, threw himself into his military duties with renewed intensity, but friends reported that he seemed hollow, going through the motions of his responsibilities without his usual enthusiasm. The separation had given him perspective on what he had lost, and more importantly, what he had failed to protect while he had it. 3 months after their split, William appeared unexpectedly at Catherine's family home. He looked tired, older, somehow as if the separation had aged him beyond his years. "I've been thinking," he said when Catherine opened the door, his formal greeting abandoned in favor of direct honesty, "about what you said, about losing yourself. I realize I'd never asked you what you wanted. I just assumed you'd fit into the life I had planned." Catherine stepped aside to let him in, her heart racing despite herself. "And what are you asking now?" "I'm asking if you'll let me try again. Differently this time. As partners, not as a prince, and the woman waiting for him to make up his mind." Catherine studied his face, seeing sincerity in his blue eyes, but also uncertainty. He wasn't offering guarantees or easy solutions, just the possibility of building something better together. "It won't be simple," she said finally. "No," William agreed. "But I love you too much to let you disappear. And I think I finally understand that loving you means seeing you, really seeing you, not just the role I want you to fill." It wasn't a proposal or a promise of immediate resolution to their complicated circumstances, but it was something more valuable: acknowledgement, respect, and the foundation for a partnership built on equality rather than assumption. For Catherine, it was enough to begin again. The reunion marked a turning point in their relationship, but it also brought new challenges that neither Catherine nor William had fully anticipated. The media, having declared their relationship over, now dissected every interaction for signs of reconciliation. The pressure was different this time, more intense because everyone was watching for failure or success, and both possibilities carried their own burdens. William kept his promise to approach their relationship differently. He consulted Catherine on decisions that would affect her, included her in conversations about their future, rather than presenting her with predetermined plans. He also began to push back more forcefully against the institutional expectations that had previously shaped his choices, insisting on his right to a private personal life even as he accepted his public duties. Catherine, for her part, had returned to the relationship with a clearer sense of her own boundaries and needs. She continued working with her family's business, maintaining her own professional identity and financial independence. She also became more strategic about managing media attention, learning to use the press rather than simply enduring it. Their renewed relationship faced its most significant test when they decided to take a skiing holiday in the French Alps. What should have been a private getaway became a media circus when paparazzi photographers pursued them relentlessly on the slopes, creating dangerous situations in their attempts to capture exclusive images. The incident that changed everything happened on their second day. Catherine and William were skiing down an intermediate slope when a photographer on a snowmobile cut too close, causing Catherine to swerve sharply to avoid a collision. She lost control and crashed into a safety barrier, her ski binding releasing. With a sharp crack that echoed across the mountain, William reached her within seconds, his face pale with terror as he knelt beside her in the snow. Catherine was conscious but clearly shaken. Her wrist bent at an odd angle, and blood seeping from a cut on her forehead where her goggles had been pushed up during the fall. "Don't move," William said, his training kicking in as he assessed her. "Injuries. Help is coming." But what struck Catherine most wasn't the pain or fear. It was the raw anguish in William's voice. In that moment, she saw clearly how much their relationship cost him emotionally. How the constant worry about her safety and well-being wore on him in ways he rarely showed. As the ski patrol arrived and began carefully moving Catherine onto a stretcher, William stayed by her side, holding her uninjured hand and speaking to her in low, reassuring tones. The photographer who had caused the accident had long since disappeared, but other media personnel continued to shoot pictures of the scene, capturing Catherine's vulnerability and William's distress for the world to see. At the hospital, as doctors confirmed that Catherine had a fractured wrist and mild concussion, but would recover fully, William sat beside her bed looking haunted. The accident had crystallized something for both of them about the price of their relationship and the responsibilities that came with loving someone in the public eye. "I'm so sorry," William said quietly once they were alone. "This is my fault. The attention, the photographers, all of it. You were hurt because of who I am." Catherine, despite the pain medication making her drowsy, could see the guilt eating at him. "William, look at me," she said firmly. "This isn't your fault. You didn't choose to be born into your family any more than I chose to fall in love with you. But we did choose each other, and that means we face these challenges together." The skiing accident became a watershed moment in their relationship with the press and the public. The images of Catherine's fall and William's obvious distress generated unprecedented sympathy for the couple. Even traditionally critical media outlets began questioning whether the pursuit of private individuals had gone too far. More importantly, the incident prompted serious conversations within royal circles about Catherine's status and protection. For the first time, senior palace officials began discussing concrete timelines for the couple's future. Recognizing that the current situation was unsustainable for everyone involved, William's grandmother, the Queen, requested a private meeting with both of them shortly after their return to London. Catherine had met her briefly at official events, but this was different. They sat in a small, comfortable sitting room at Windsor Castle, surrounded by photographs of 4 generations of the royal family. "I understand you've had quite an ordeal," the Queen said, her voice warm but direct. "I want you both to know that the family is prepared to provide additional security and support, regardless of any official announcements." Catherine felt tears prick her eyes at the kindness in the older woman's voice. For years she had wondered whether she was truly accepted by William's family or merely tolerated as an inevitable presence. "Thank you, Your Majesty," Catherine replied. "That means more than you know." The Queen studied them both carefully. "William, I hope you understand that love, particularly in our family, requires not just commitment, but courage. The courage to protect what matters most, even when institutions and traditions resist change. The message was clear. If William wanted to build a life with Catherine, he needed to be proactive about making it happen, not reactive to external pressures and timelines. That conversation prompted William to begin serious preparation for proposal. Plans, but characteristically, he wanted it to be perfect, meaningful, and private. He spent months researching rings, considering locations, and thinking about timing. He wanted to propose somewhere that held significance for both of them, somewhere that represented their journey together rather than his royal heritage. The decision came to him during one of their walks along the Kenyan coast, where they had returned for another conservation-focused holiday. As they watched the sunset paint the Indian Ocean in shades of gold and pink, William realized this was where he had first understood that Catherine saw him as simply William, not as a prince or future king. He had smuggled his mother's engagement ring out of the country in his backpack, wrapped carefully in a sock to avoid detection by security scanners. Princess Diana's sapphire and diamond ring had been chosen by Catherine herself during a private viewing of family jewelry, though she hadn't known its ultimate purpose at the time. On their third evening in Kenya, William suggested a walk along a secluded stretch of beach. Catherine, exhausted from a day of wildlife viewing, almost declined. But something in William's manner suggested the walk was important to him. They walked in comfortable silence for nearly an hour. The only sounds: the gentle crash of waves and the distant calls of night birds. When William finally stopped, they were alone on a pristine stretch of sand, the Milky Way, brilliant overhead in the absence of light pollution. "Catherine," William said, turning to face her in the moonlight, "do you remember what you said in the hospital about choosing each other?" "Of course," Catherine replied, though something in his tone made her heart begin to race. "I chose you the first day I met you," William continued, his voice steady, despite the magnitude of what he was about to do. "Not because of duty or expectation, but because you saw me, really saw me. I want to spend the rest of my life seeing you, supporting you, loving you exactly as you are." When William dropped to one knee in the sand, Catherine felt the world slow around them. The ring caught the moonlight as he held it up, and she could see his hands trembling slightly despite his composed words. "Catherine Elizabeth Middleton," he said formally, "will you marry me?" Through her tears, Catherine could barely whisper her yes, but William heard it clearly. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, she felt the weight of not just the jewelry, but everything it represented: commitment, partnership, and a future they would build together, despite all the obstacles they had already overcome. They sat on the beach for hours afterward, talking about their hopes and fears, their dreams for their marriage and family. It felt like the most natural thing in the world. This quiet moment of promise under the African stars, far from the expectations and pressures that would inevitably surround them once their engagement became public knowledge. "What comes next?" William asked, as they finally began walking back toward their accommodation. Catherine considered the question seriously. The engagement would trigger an unprecedented level of scrutiny and attention. There would be protocol, lessons, security briefings, and careful choreography of every public appearance. She would need to learn to navigate not just media attention, but institutional expectations, family dynamics, and the weight of representing something larger than herself. "I'm ready to be your partner in whatever comes," she replied finally. "The rest we'll figure out together." William squeezed her hand, the new ring catching the light from their distant lodge. For the first time in years, the future felt not like something to be endured, but something to be embraced, built together, by two people who had chosen each other freely and completely. The years that followed their wedding were a whirlwind of public duties, private joys, and the gradual settling into roles that neither of them could have fully prepared for. Catherine, now the Duchess of Cambridge, threw herself into royal responsibilities. With characteristic determination, developing patronages focused on early childhood development, mental health awareness, and the arts. William balanced his own charitable commitments with increasing preparation for his future role as king. Their family grew with the arrivals of George, Charlotte, and Louis, each birth bringing new dimensions to their relationship and new challenges. In balancing public duty with private family life, Catherine proved to be a devoted mother, fiercely protective of her children's privacy. While understanding the public's genuine affection for the young royals, the couple worked hard to maintain the partnership they had built, supporting each other through difficult periods and celebrating successes together. When William struggled with the pressures of his evolving role, Catherine provided steady support and practical advice. When Catherine faced criticism for her approach to royal duties or parenting choices, William defended her publicly and privately, with unwavering loyalty. But as the years passed, both began to feel the weight of their positions in ways they hadn't fully anticipated. The constant scrutiny, the endless obligations, and the knowledge that their every decision would be analyzed and criticized took a toll that wasn't always visible to the outside world. The first serious crack in their public composure came during a particularly challenging period when William's grandfather, Prince Philip, fell seriously ill. The family rallied around the Queen, but the strain was enormous. William found himself caught between his duties as a grandson, his responsibilities as a future king, and his obligations as a husband and father. Catherine watched her husband struggle with the competing demands on his time and emotions. Seeing him grow increasingly thin and tired as he tried to be everything to everyone, she took on additional responsibilities to lighten his load. But the pressure was building for both of them. The breaking point came on a gray February morning when they received word that Prince Philip's condition had worsened dramatically. William needed to be with his family, but he also had a long-scheduled engagement that afternoon, opening a new children's wing at a hospital in Manchester. The optics of canceling would be difficult, but leaving his grandfather's bedside felt impossible. "To your family," Catherine said without hesitation when William confided his dilemma to her over a hurried breakfast. "I'll handle Manchester." "Catherine, that's not fair to you. You have your own commitments today, and the Manchester event is significant. They're expecting me specifically. They're expecting a member of the royal family who cares about their cause," Catherine corrected gently. "That's what they'll get. Your grandfather needs you more than those hospital administrators need your specific presence." William looked at his wife across their kitchen table, still in her dressing gown, with her hair pulled back messily, and felt a surge of love so powerful it took his breath away. After all these years, she still put his needs, his family's needs, above protocol and public expectation. "What did I do to deserve you?" he asked quietly. "You chose to see me," Catherine replied, echoing his proposal words from years earlier. "And you keep choosing to see me every day." But William's gratitude was tinged with guilt. He could see the cost of their life in the fine lines around Catherine's eyes, in the way she sometimes stared out windows with an expression he couldn't quite read, in her increasing reluctance to attend certain social events that had once energized her. The Manchester hospital visit went beautifully. Catherine connected with the young patients and their families with genuine warmth, and her impromptu appearance was received with enthusiasm by both the staff and the media. But William watched the coverage from his grandfather's bedside and felt a complex mix of pride and sorrow. Prince Philip recovered from that particular health scare, but the incident had clarified something important for both William and Catherine about the nature of sacrifice in their relationship. They were partners, yes, but they were also individuals who had given up certain freedoms and possibilities in service to something larger than themselves. That evening, after the children were in bed and the day's obligations were finally complete, William found Catherine in their private sitting room, still in her formal dress from the hospital visit, but with her shoes kicked off and her feet tucked under her on the sofa. "Thank you," he said simply, settling beside her. "For today, for always." Catherine leaned against his shoulder, feeling the familiar comfort of his presence, but also a weariness that went deeper than physical exhaustion. "Do you ever wonder," she said quietly, "what our life would have been like if we were just ordinary people?" William was quiet for a long moment, considering the question seriously. "Sometimes," he admitted. "Do you regret it? This life? This choice?" "No," Catherine said immediately, then paused. "But I sometimes grieve for the simpler version of us. The couple who could take spontaneous holidays or have arguments without worrying about photographers. who could make mistakes without it becoming national news. William understood what she meant. Their love story had become public property in ways that were both wonderful and suffocating. People drew inspiration from their partnership, but that also meant their relationship existed partly in service to others' hopes and expectations. "I love you," William said, the words carrying the weight of everything they had built together and everything they had given up for it. "I love you too," Catherine replied, and in her voice he could hear not just affection, but a deep, abiding commitment that had weathered years of extraordinary pressures. They sat together in comfortable silence. Two people who had chosen each other completely and continued to choose each other every day. Despite the complications that choice entailed, outside their windows, London hummed with its usual energy. Unaware of the quiet moment of connection between two people who had somehow managed to build a genuine partnership in the most public of circumstances. In the months that followed, William and Catherine began having more conversations about balance, about protecting their relationship and family while fulfilling their public roles. They established new boundaries, insisted on more private time together, and worked to ensure that their marriage remained a source of strength rather than another obligation to manage the wordless communication that had developed between them. Over the years became their greatest asset. In public, they could convey support, amusement, concern, or love with the slightest glance or gesture. At private moments, they could comfort each other without words, understanding instinctively what the other needed. Their story had begun with a young woman late to a lecture and a young man who quietly provided an answer. It continued with two people who kept choosing to answer each other's needs, to see each other clearly, and to build something lasting together, despite extraordinary circumstances. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as they always had, as partners who understood that love, particularly in their unique circumstances, required not just feeling but action, not just commitment but courage, and not just to people, but to people willing to keep becoming the best versions of themselves, for each other, and for the responsibilities they shared. In the end, their greatest achievement wasn't their public service or their royal roles, but the quiet miracle of a genuine marriage that had survived and thrived under pressures that would have destroyed lesser partnerships. They had built something real and lasting, something that belonged entirely to them, even as it served something much larger than themselves.